Even if you're not a Street Fighter fan, there's no way you haven't heard the very iconic Hadouken. And what do you know, the memorable Hadouken that has inspired everyone over the generations is none other than the one we'll be talking about in today's video, Ryu. Ryu is the epitome, the personification of everything that Street Fighter stands for, the unwavering pursuit of strength, discipline, and perseverance. His journey is one filled with tumultuous hardship and betrayal, so join us as we take this trip down memory lane, exploring everything about Ryu's origins, philosophy, and the battles that made him one of the most legendary fighters in this universe. Before we get into this explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to the channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Who is Ryu? When it comes to Street Fighter, the heart and soul of the entire game series has to be Ryu. He's the main protagonist of the game series, so it's kinda obvious that he would embody all the core traits of the game. His character design, his signature moves, everything about him is memorable. I mean, I'm sure if I were to tell you about a red headband, discipline, and a white gi in a game of Guess Who, Street Fighter Edition, you'd always think of Ryu. And who could ever forget his signature moves like Shoryuken or Tatsumaki Senpuyaku? I think one of the most unique features of Ryu has got to be the way he looks at fighting as a warrior. Throughout the series, we see a lot of different warriors, yes, but none of them are quite like Ryu. Everyone is either looking for power, revenge, or fame. However, Ryu is not looking for any of these things. He's taken the path of a warrior because he wants to better himself. This is the true warrior mindset, and it shows throughout his entire journey. His rivalry with Ken Masters, who's kind of Ryu 2.0 in a lot of ways, helps us get a better understanding of Ryu. Unlike Ken, who's just extremely talented, Ryu is the warrior he is today because of his discipline. His battles with Bison and Sagat showcase how strong he's grown over the years. While all of these traits make Ryu an incredible character to examine, we think what makes him absolutely inspiring is his long-drawn struggle with the Satsui no Hado. Most Street Fighter fans know what this is already, but in case you're new to the lore, the Satsui no Hado is a dark force that would grant a person a huge amount of power. However, in exchange, that person has to give up their humanity. Now, warriors who chase after power would obviously 100% fall victim to this, but not Ryu. Ryu's refusal to give in to the Satsui no Hado is what makes him so compelling. He's one of the most loved and enduring fighters in the entire Street Fighter world because of his ability to resist temptation. Ryu's childhood and life in Thailand. Before Ryu became the fighter we know, he was actually an orphan. He had no memories of whether or not his parents were even alive. The only thing he remembered from his childhood was being given to a priest in this unknown temple. This is where he was found by Gouken. Gouken adopted Ryu and raised him in his secluded dojo. He trained Ryu in the martial arts, and Ryu, in turn, was inspired watching Gouken, Akuma, and Gotetsu train with each other. Eventually, Gouken would take Ken Masters, his best friend's spoiled son, under his wing, and he would end up becoming Ryu's sparring partner and best friend. Ken's addition to the dojo serves two purposes. Not only does it give the audience a contrast to Ryu's journey as a warrior, but it also gives Ryu a friend and brother that he never had. Eventually, when Ryu came of age, Gouken decided that he was mature enough to hone his skills against the best fighters around the world. After Ken and Ryu finished their training, they had a talk about who would be the more popular martial artist among the two. In a way, this is what started their journey. Ken traveled to the USA while Ryu went to Thailand. Now, you might be wondering why Ryu chose Thailand of all places, right? Well, turns out that Thailand is the home of Sagat, the emperor of Muay Thai. Even to this day, a lot of fans of martial arts would agree that Muay Thai is one of the strongest, most hardcore martial arts out there, and well, that's exactly what Ryu wanted. He wanted to test his skills against Sagat himself. But he's just a novice fighter. Why would the Emperor even want to fight him? That's where Ryu decided to do a big brain move. He decided that he would defeat as many Muay Thai fighters as possible. If he keeps doing that, eventually, Sagat will hear about him and he'll have to show up for a fight in order to defend the martial arts' reputation as well as his own. With that foolproof plan, Ryu went on to defeat 20 Muay Thai fighters. After decimating them in the ring, he even taunted them, saying that they should be embarrassed for letting a stranger ruin the reputation of Muay Thai. This led to Sagat eventually hearing about it, and Ryu's plan worked like a charm. Sagat was so angry that he challenged Ryu to a fight and they clashed. It was a brutal fight, but in the end, Ryu won the battle by using his Shoryuken. This was a near-fatal move, and Sagat was immediately knocked out. The Shoryuken left him with a horrible scar on his chest, and when he woke up, he swore vengeance, promising to get Ryu back for treating him this way. Ryu's chance to meet up with Bison and Akuma. After defeating Sagat, Ryu left Thailand. He traveled to various locations, training and pondering over the age-old question that has haunted everyone. What is the meaning of life? Before Sagat, Ryu had some sort of goal. He wanted to be the strongest man in the world, and since Sagat was the emperor of Muay Thai, the strongest martial art, it made sense to defeat him. But now that he could tick that off his to-do list, Ryu couldn't comprehend what he should be doing. His greatest purpose was achieved, but he didn't want to accept that at all. So, while he pondered over the questions, he kept working on himself, leading to him coming up with new moves, also known as Shinku Hadouken. Eventually, he came across an isolated island known as Gouken. Here, he fought with Akuma and won. However, this was actually a ploy by Akuma. You see, he was testing Ryu to see what kind of powers he had. And as you can guess, Akuma realized that he and Ryu had the same powers, so he decided to tell the younger fighter a trade secret of the Shotokan practitioners. He told him about the Satsui no Hado, a dark power that resides in anyone who practices Shotokan and depletes their humanity, forcing them to win every fight, even if it means killing the opponent brutally. With that little info dump, Akuma smashes the island with one punch and leaves, stranding Ryu. Ryu is obviously not a damsel in distress, so he manages to escape the island. However, his luck is absolutely terrible because he ends up coming face to face with Sagat, who was out searching for Ryu to have a grudge match. Ryu doesn't want to fight with him because he knows that there's no way Sagat has fully recovered from their last fight. However, Sagat insists, and seeing no way out, Ryu held himself back, allowing Sagat to win. Sagat leaves after winning the match, but soon enough, he realizes that Ryu allowed him to win because of his health. So, Sagat vows he will fight Ryu once again. He's annoyingly persistent like that. Ryu, on the other hand, went out traveling the world once more after his rematch with Sagat. And one day, out of nowhere, he came across Ken. As the two friends spoke, we came to realize that Ryu was really struggling badly with his warrior style. Now that he knew about Satsui no Hado, a part of him kept wondering which level of power he should be using. Should he use the level of power that he used when he defeated Sagat, or should he use the fist that Akuma uses to kill people? Ken realizes that his friend is getting in his head, and so, to stop Ryu from overthinking so much, Ken offers to fight him. However, the fight ends up the way we'd probably all predict. Ryu loses. That's what you thought would happen, right? This loss makes it evident to Ken just how much his brother is struggling, so Ken encourages Ryu to keep on fighting and searching for the truth as a warrior, and he hands him his iconic red headband. This headband was supposed to be a reminder of their fight and Ken's advice on keeping the fight alive, and Ryu happily accepts the memorabilia that's now a huge part of Ryu. After that, the two brothers parted ways. Eventually, Ryu crosses paths with Sakura, his biggest fan. Sakura insists that she wants to train under him, but Ryu refuses, claiming that he has so much left to learn. So, for now, Sakura agrees to be happy with just a picture of him. However, the growth that Ryu seeks isn't going to come so easily for him. He meets with Rose, who is very much involved with Bison. She tells Ryu that there's no way he would be able to defeat Bison unless he was willing to trade his soul for victory. Ryu obviously assumed that this was just a bit of over-exaggeration and went to fight Bison. As you can guess, despite putting up a great fight, Ryu was defeated. Instead of leaving his opponent, Bison brings Ryu with him. He then brainwashes Ryu after realizing that Satsui no Hado is very similar to the psycho power that Bison wields. Luckily, Bison's powers don't work out the way he thought they would. Ken, Sakura, and even Sagat had been following Ryu, each for their own reasons. They end up showing up at Bison's lair, following Ryu's trail, and manage to save him. Ken and Sakura serve as a distraction to Bison, while Sagat duked it out with a brainwashed Ryu. He defeats Ryu and realizes just how far gone he is, so he calls out to him, urging him to come back to his senses. Surprisingly enough, Ryu actually does come back to his senses. He confronts Bison and manages to win this fight. But this wouldn't be the last time we see Bison. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Ryu in the World Warrior Tournament. Now, after temporarily defeating Bison, Ryu decides to join the World Warrior Tournament, but what he didn't know was that this entire tournament was orchestrated by Shadowloo, who wanted to retrieve his body. Now, at one point, Ryu sent Ken a letter that rekindled the latter's fighting spirit. Now, exactly how well Ryu did in the tournament is a point of contention amongst the fans. In the English translation of Street Fighter Eternal Challenge, we get hints that Ryu may have lost the fight to Ken. However, in the Street Fighter II complete file, we see that Ryu in fact defeated both Ken and Bison. We get another mention of it in Gamest 255, which came out in 1999, where it was stated that Ryu avoided Bison's remnants after Akuma destroyed Bison, which implied that Ryu was one of the finalists. There are several endings in the game, along with a lot of supplementary materials. After going through all that, we can conclude that in this Warrior tournament, Ryu managed to defeat both Blanka and Zangief, which led to him going into the semi-finals. On this level, he fought with Sagat, who now respects the prowess that Ryu has shown. Ryu would eventually defeat Sagat and move on to the finals, where he would fight with M. Bison. Battle against Seth and Ryu's role in the Sin Tournament. After finishing up with the World Warrior Tournament, Ryu traveled to an isolated desert where he trained for a while. While training, he remembered his argument with Akuma, where he threatened Ryu to give in to the Dark Hado. This is not something that Ryu wanted to deal with, really, so like the mature man that he is, he goes to a bar, hoping to drown his worries with alcohol. At the bar, he met with a biker who told Ryu the story of this American martial arts champion who left his family. Ryu assumed it was Ken and decided to go after the guy. However, he ends up getting ambushed by C. Viper. Luckily for Ryu, that was also when Cammy showed up. See, Cammy, the Delta Red agent, was actually after Viper for a while. However, Cammy wasn't strong enough to defeat Viper and ended up falling into her hands. As Viper tortures Cammy, Ryu gives in to the Dark Hado and goes off on Viper. However, Viper manages to run away from the possessed Ryu, who goes on to kill several Sin scientists. His rampage continued until Chun-Li, Guile, and Ken showed up to save both him and Cammy. Ryu was then restrained by Sakura while Ken called the hospital to help Cammy. This is when Ryu came back to his senses and felt super guilty for crashing out like that. Ken sent Ryu to his mansion trying to keep his brother safe. However, while there, Ryu figured out that the whole thing was orchestrated by Seth, the leader of Sin, who wanted to use him for their evil plans. Guile had made a plan to incarcerate Seth by infiltrating his cruise ship, and Ryu tagged along with them, knowing that Seth would be there waiting for him. Sure enough, after plowing through a bunch of thugs with Ken, Ryu eventually came face to face with Seth. Sadly, Seth had the upper hand in the entire fight and started giving Ryu some unwanted advice on what power is. Ryu, however, wasn't going to fall for that. He admitted bravely that while he doesn't understand what power truly may be, he does understand Seth's philosophy, and he doesn't vibe with that. This upsets Seth, who keeps beating down on Ryu, unamused by the young warrior not joining hands with him. Eventually, Ryu managed to overpower Seth by awakening a new power and almost lands a near-fatal blow. The new power exhausted Ryu so much that he passed out soon after. Ken takes Ryu home, and after a few days of recovery, the brothers part ways once again. Now, sometime after this, Ryu decides to join another tournament, hoping to hone his fighting skills, as well as meet up with Ken, whom he hadn't seen in a while. While competing in this tournament, he met up with Sakura, who inspired him to train harder, and Sagat, whom he fought with once more. While the results of this fight are unknown, it's heavily implied that Ryu won. As the tournament comes closer to its end, Ryu ends up battling the host of the tournament, none other than Seth, but rather a copy of him. Ryu defeated the copy of Seth in Sin headquarters, and as the battle progressed, the building fell apart around them because Ryu used the Dark Hado on the machine that Sin had developed. This machine, known as the Bleece machine, was actually a weapon of mass destruction that could harness the energy in human bodies. Yikes. Sakura, who really cares about Ryu, was actually out looking for him. She eventually came to the building and she found both Ryu and the machine. The machine emitted an energy pulse and knocked Sakura down. Seeing that, Ryu decided to unleash a Shoryuken on the machine, destroying the weapon for good. Now, as you can understand, the effect of Satsui no Hado is slowly increasing in Ryu's heart. It's eating away at his soul. Almost like a miracle, Ryu ends up meeting with Gouken. Gouken and Akuma had fought before, and it was implied that Gouken had passed away from the fight. But turns out that was actually a fake-out. Gouken hears what Ryu has been struggling with, and using the power of nothingness, he manages to seal away the Dark Hado in Ryu, which knocks the lad out. While he's unconscious, Akuma shows up. He challenges Gouken to a fight, claiming that whoever wins this death duel will be the one to own Ryu. The result of this duel is again left up for interpretation, but given that Ryu wakes up sort of free of the influence of Dark Hado, we can conclude that either Gouken won or that the battle was probably interrupted and ended up as a draw. Much later, we see Ryu and Ken meet up with Gouken at a cliff face. While Ken wants Gouken to stay, Ryu is willing to let his master go if he wants. After that heart-to-heart conversation, Ken and Ryu decide to travel through the desert. As they're walking, Rufus drives past them on his motorcycle, mocking the two men. However, soon after Rufus's motorcycle breaks down, he sees the two fighters driving past him in Ken's Jeep. It's heavily implied that Gouken had taught Ryu about Denjin Hadouken and the Shin Shoryuken right before the story picks up in Street Fighter 3. The Return of Shadaloo. In Street Fighter V, we see Ryu's dream. In this dream, the evil Ryu is seen telling Ryu to accept the power to kill. This is obviously the Satsui no Hado acting up again. Ryu rejects it once more, but the next day he fights with Gouken, and in the middle of this sparring match, Ryu taps into his Satsui no Hado and tries to kill Gouken. The Hadouken goes up in bright light, and Ryu wakes up, realizing that attacking his master was just a bad dream. Gouken, who somehow knows exactly what Ryu is going through, told him the grave news. Satsui no Hado almost took over Ryu for good. We soon get introduced to Azam and Rashid, who had traveled a long way to meet with Ryu. When Gouken asks why they're there, we learn that Rashid actually wants to fight Ryu. Ryu refuses the offer because he's worried about Satsui no Hado, but Rashid has no idea about this and is confused. This makes Gouken ask Ryu why he's so scared of the sparring match. The truth that Ryu seeks so badly lies in the heart of battle, and that is the only way Ryu would know. Realizing that this is the only way, Ryu gets up and spars with Rashid. He ends up defeating Rashid, who's happy about it and takes his leave. Gouken tells Ryu to go meet with Ken when Ryu decides to leave the house again to understand his power a little better. So Ryu travels to Brazil and meets up with Ken there. Gouken had already told Ken about Ryu's struggles and believed that if Ken and Ryu had a good fight, Ryu would be okay. So using that advice, they fight, but Ryu still finds himself worried about the Dark Hado. This is when Ken promises Ryu that he will personally take him down if Ryu ever ends up turning to the dark side. So instead of holding himself back whenever there's an opportunity to fight, Ken wanted Ryu to go all out and fight, which would help him understand his powers better. This comforts Ryu to a degree, and he goes to China. This is where he's ambushed by a Shadaloo soldier. Nash showed up right then and took down the fighter himself. Nash's presence triggered the Satsui no Hado. Nash insists that they should fight as that would help Ryu understand the power better. The fight ends in a draw as Nash too is taken aback by these powers, which surpass his expectations by a lot. Ryu confessed that he struggled with controlling and suppressing his powers, but thanks to Nash, he understands them a little better. After this brief exchange, Nash leaves. Ryu and Necalli. Soon after his run-in with Nash, we see Ryu meeting with Dalsim. Dalsim was training with Mahesh, and Ryu confessed to them that he was still struggling with Satsui no Hado. Remembering Ken's advice, Dalsim and Ryu decide to spar. After sparring, Dalsim realizes what's happening to Ryu. He points out that if Ryu keeps fighting the Satsui no Hado, then eventually the Dark Hado will take him over. The only way to get over the Dark Hado was to face it. Right as they were talking about it, Necalli showed up. Necalli wants the souls of the fighters for his consumption. Ryu decides to fight against Necalli while Dalsim keeps Mahesh safe. During this fight, Ryu ends up getting overpowered by Necalli. This starts triggering the Satsui no Hado in Ryu. Dalsim ends up taking Ryu's punches, claiming that Ryu needs to find a way to control the Dark Hado instead of leaning into it. While Dalsim starts fighting off Necalli and taking the stress off Ryu, Ryu notices that a black moon is blocking the sun. This triggers something in him and he starts seeing visions of Bison. Eventually, Necalli temporarily leaves, giving Dalsim, Mahesh, and Ryu a much-needed break. After Necalli left, Dalsim explained to Ryu who exactly Necalli was. Turns out, Necalli was an ancient being who consumes the souls of warriors and only shows up when several warriors are in crisis or danger. Hearing that, Ryu starts putting two and two together and figures out that the Black Moon is the one the warriors need to be wary of. So, with that in mind, Ryu starts training to control the Hado. He eventually defeats Necalli when he shows up again, and with that victory as a mark that he's ready, Ryu decides to join his teammates, Chun-Li, Karen, and Ken as they attack Shadaloo. In this fight, Chun-Li successfully defeated Fang and managed to rescue Li Fen. Ryu, on the other hand, goes against Bison. Bison challenges him, and the fight that follows is extremely brutal. Bison was still standing strong after a barrage of attacks from Ryu, which led to Ryu hitting him with a Hadouken that had the power of nothingness in it. This attack basically proves that Ryu has finally started to master the powers of Satsui no Hado. The aftermath of this attack isn't good for Bison, as you might have guessed. His body starts cracking and then dissipates into a flash of light, sealing his fate as the one who lost the fight. Bison's base too begins to crumble, which forces Ryu, Chun-Li, Guile, and Li Fen to start running for their lives. However, Chun-Li was at the back of the group and she was almost burned to a crisp by the fires from the explosion. Luckily, Ryu noticed this and managed to use Denjin Hadouken to save the day. Soon after this incident, we see Ryu meditating when Ken visits him. Ken is happy to see Ryu doing better and challenges him to a sparring match. As they fight, Ryu is finally able to defeat Ken, but Ken also manages to knock off the red headband. As the headband falls to the ground, Ryu realized that he had finally found the answer to his true strength. Ken is also happy to see Ryu's growth as a person, and they share a friendly fist bump before parting ways once again. Fighting against the Illuminati. When Ryu reached 33, he was living a life much akin to that of Jack Reacher. He was traveling every day, hoping to become a true martial artist, finally. Ken, on the other hand, was already a father, so as you can imagine, Ken and Ryu's relationship has changed quite a bit. Eventually, when Ryu was living in Japan after a long time of traveling across the world, Ken invited him to come to a hot spring inn in Tokyo. Ken introduced him to his new student, Sean, at the retreat. Together, the three watched Zangief and Hogan's fight for the WWCA title. In this fight, they see Hogan go on a rampage after being hit by Zangief's double lariat. He even picked up a chair and chucked it at the crowd, almost hitting a woman. Luckily, Ryu managed to deflect the chair, and Sean jumped in on the action and knocked Hogan out before he could hurt anyone else. This fight ended up sort of inspiring Ryu to join the World Warrior tournament. He figured that by fighting more, he'd be able to advance his abilities. Ken asks Sean to fight Ryu, and Ryu indulges in the fight. Every time, Ryu ended up winning against Sean by using the Hadouken. About a year later in Ken's timeline, we meet up again with Ryu, and we learn that he ended up winning the competition. He eventually meets up with Alex, the young wrestler. They have a match, and Ryu ends up defeating the younger man with ease. He urges Alex to continue honing his abilities, and Ryu's words inspire him. So, the young boy decides to start his journey to become stronger and eventually fight with Ryu once again. In Oro's ending, we learn that Ryu is still training, and he is unaware of Oro even though he has heard the latter's voice. Lastly, we have Ryu's ending in the game, and in that, we see Ryu sitting under a waterfall, training his body and mind. He mutters to himself about what it means to be a true warrior, why he needs to be strong, and how far he's come. Ryu believes that as long as he is challenged in fierce battle, he will always have the strength to continue fighting. Ryu's latest journey in Street Fighter 6. Throughout Street Fighter 6, Ryu introduces himself and talks about his journey up until now. He talks about Ken, his greatest friend and his worst rival. He also thinks about other fellow fighters like Guile, Dhalsim, and Chun-Li. After talking about his friends, he thinks about his enemies, starting from Retsu, Akuma, Sagat, and Bison, along with the evil version of himself. He thinks about the challenge that was posed to him by the evil Ryu that he had to overcome. Finally, Ryu no longer has to worry about the effects of Satsui no Hado as he has overcome it, and with that, he gets to enjoy peace of mind, something he hadn't experienced for a while. As he continues to carry on with his quest for true strength, his search for people stronger than himself is a never-ending journey. After this interesting introduction, we pick up the story at Genbu Temple. Apparently, after training abroad for many years, Ryu decided to return to his home. He came to Genbu Temple hoping to train there. The priest of the temple allowed Ryu to stay and eventually invited him to a festival as the portable shrine bearer. With these festivities and a general training module, Ryu's days were going by well. However, things changed when Luke approached him. Luke obviously wanted to fight with Ryu, and to that, Ryu had only one answer. What was the purpose behind this fight? Obviously, that question confused Luke. He had never thought about things like that. Ryu elaborated that he should probably know why he wants to fight someone before indulging in one. After thinking about Ryu's statements for a while, Luke came up with an answer. He explained that he wanted to fight with someone who was stronger than him, and this resonated with Ryu as this was exactly what he used to think when he was young. They had their match, and as you guys might have guessed, Ryu ended up coming out victorious. Before Luke could take a picture with him, Ryu left. Luke managed to snap a still of Ryu's back, which made him look like his younger self, but he decided it wasn't so bad after all. But Luke wasn't the only one. Lily also came to challenge Ryu to a fight. On top of that, he eventually heard about Ken's situation from a common acquaintance. However, Ryu chose not to get involved with Ken because Ken never reached out to him on his own. Eventually, Ryu and Avatar met. In their discussion, Ryu told Avatar that he planned on staying around Japan for a while. Avatar ends up meeting with both Akuma and Bison, which makes them scared. Thankfully, Ryu and Luke managed to help Avatar overcome their fear of Akuma. Ryu's appearance in other media. Given just how iconic Ryu is, of course, over the years we've seen him in several different forms of media. We saw him in a comic series based on the Street Fighter series. Here, we learn of Bison holding a tournament hoping to capture all the greatest fighters across the world. He was going to get all these fighters and use them to grow his own psycho drive, which would help Bison gain even more power and eventually dominate the world. Ryu joined this tournament. He fought his way through the tournament, even facing off against Sagat at one point. Ryu made it to the final round where he had to fight against Bison, but by that time, Bison was already the one in control of Ken and others. Right when they were about to fight, Akuma showed up to interrupt them. Now, why did he show up? Turns out that Akuma had been looking for Ryu this entire time, so he beats up M. Bison super easily and destroys his Psycho Drive, leaving Bison completely helpless. With M. Bison out of the picture, Akuma was ready for his fight with Ryu, and Ryu too was more than happy to join in. Akuma had killed Gouken, and Ryu was ready to avenge his master. However, throughout the entire fight, Ryu held back the entire time. This irked Akuma, as he thought Ryu holding back was weakness. However, Ryu stuck to his guns. He soon realized that the only way he'd be able to defeat Akuma would be by giving in to Satsui no Hado. However, Ryu refused to give in to the Dark Hado, as that would be betraying Gouken's teaching, so Ryu lets Akuma beat down on him, and right before he can land the killing blow, Gouken shows up. Yep, he literally resurrected to impart some knowledge on Ryu. Turns out this was all a test, and Ryu managed to pass the final one. Gouken fights with Akuma while Ryu ends up passing out from the smoke. Right before he fell into the lava, Dalsum manages to rescue him. After recovering from this incident, Ryu went back to Japan and rebuilt Gouken's dojo from scratch. While he didn't defeat Akuma in the battle, he succeeded in winning in life, so he had nothing to worry about except to focus on training. Other than the comics, we also get to see Ryu in the Street Fighter movies, including the animated ones. Although our favorite appearance of Ryu has to be in Wreck-It Ralph alongside Zangief. We also see Ryu in the Street Fighter TV series, but there's another interesting insert of Ryu that we have to mention. Did you know that in Power Rangers Battle for the Grid, released in 2019, Ryu was actually released as a part of a DLC pack that came out in May 2021? This Power Ranger version of Ryu is very similar to the one we've seen in Street Fighter. However, when Lord Zed of the Power Rangers universe weakened the Morphin Grid, Ryu got pulled into another world. The Power Rangers team of this world is completely shattered, and now Ryu had to be the one to not only save the team, but also the world. He also got a power coin and became the Crimson Hawk Ranger, and he looks really freaking cool. Why is Ryu such an iconic character? Ryu's uniform is so memorable that, for those who know him, he can never be mistaken for someone else. His character, with medium-length brown hair, white gi, black belt, and bare feet, is extremely recognizable. He's based on Masutatsu Oyama, and Ryu's rival, Sagat, is based on Oyama's real-life opponent, Reiba. Ryu's backstory in the first Street Fighter is actually an homage to Karate Master, a story that's based on Oyama's adventures in Thailand with his students. Now, given his backstory, it makes complete sense why Ryu is portrayed as this extremely silent and serious character. His individuality is juxtaposed with the persona that Ken has. He looks very bored and detached a lot of the time, but that's not true. It's simply his stern nature that tends to make him come off looking like that. He doesn't have a good sense of humor, but he makes up for that by being the kind and noble fighter that he is. He always respects everyone with skills, and in the Marvel vs. Capcom series, we see him look up to Cyclops, Spider-Man, and even Captain America. By the time Street Fighter III comes around, we see that Ryu has a much more friendly personality. However, he's still an introvert who remains reserved and quiet. As he's grown older, it's been very evident that he's becoming more and more like Gouken over the years, which is an extremely sweet detail. But the thing that makes Ryu extremely interesting is his dark side, and no, we're not talking about Satsui no Hado. We're talking about Ryu's tendency to force himself to become a better version of himself no matter what happens. His drive to win and his urge to be the best end up triggering off the Satsui no Hado in him, which isn't good at all. This is why Ken and Sakura, two of his closest friends, do their best to keep him grounded. Marvelous verdict! With that one, guys, we've come to the end of our video. Given Ryu's journey over the years, there's no denying that he's not an easy pin to knock down. He's one of those trees that would rather break than bend to someone's will. Ryu's perseverance in the face of adversity is truly inspiring. His story is a lot more than just the journey of a character, it's more about the balance between power and restraint, and the never-ending journey of self-improvement, which we feel is a core component of the philosophy of martial arts. Ryu wants to be the best at what he does while also figuring out how to do so without triggering Satsui no Hado, which would definitely ruin him. We feel that somehow the Satsui no Hado is the intrusive negative self-talk that we often fall victim to, especially if we're a bit of a perfectionist. However, consistency is the key to achieving satisfaction and mental peace, and we think Ryu is exactly that. He's the living, breathing example of that, as a matter of fact. We believe Ryu is a fan-favorite character because of the way he tackles his internal struggles and comes out on top. But maybe it's just because he's a badass martial artist with a sick headband. What about you guys? What do you think about Ryu? Why has he become such an enduring character over the years? Let us know in the comments down below, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.